The seat assignment should have been my first clue. When I arrived at my brother's wedding, an usher walked me toward the back of the ceremony space, not unusual. Until we reached my chair, a concrete pillar stood directly between the seat and the altar. From where I sat, I could see half the aisle and very little else. I remember looking around. Every other guest had a clear view, just not me. The usher apologized politely, said it was the seating chart he had been given. I considered mentioning it. Instead, I sat down. Weddings are complicated. Mistakes happen, at least that's what I told myself. The ceremony passed in fragments. A glimpse of the bride's entrance, part of the vows, applause I couldn't fully understand because I couldn't fully see what everyone else was seeing. The strange feeling stayed with me throughout the afternoon. Then came the photographs. Family members were gathered repeatedly for pictures. Groups formed, names were called. People moved into place. Somehow, I was never included, not intentionally excluded in any obvious way, just overlooked again and again and again. My brother barely acknowledged me, nothing rude, nothing dramatic, just enough distance to feel deliberate. The more it happened, the harder it became to ignore. The truth was that our relationship had been complicated for years, not hostile, complicated. There had been periods in his life when things fell apart, jobs lost, plans abandoned, debts accumulated, moments he rarely discussed anymore. I had been there through most of it, helping when I could, keeping confidence when necessary, never expecting repayment. Over time, he rebuilt his life, and I was genuinely proud of him. But as his success grew, something else seemed to happen. Certain chapters disappeared from his version of events. The struggles became shorter, the support became invisible, the story became cleaner, more impressive, more independent. I noticed it occasionally during conversations with his friends. The details weren't false. They were incomplete. At the reception, I finally stopped wondering whether the distance was accidental. It wasn't. Whenever introductions happened, my brother seemed careful, careful about context. Careful about history, careful about me, not because I knew damaging secrets, because I knew ordinary truths, the kind that remind people success rarely happens alone. I decided not to think about it anymore. The wedding wasn't about me. It shouldn't have been. Then the slideshow began. A large screen lit up near the dance floor. Guests turned toward it. The wedding coordinator stood nearby, monitoring everything. Photographs started appearing, childhood pictures, school events, family vacations, the usual wedding montage. People smiled, laud, pointed at old hairstyles and forgotten outfits. Then something changed. The images became less polished, more candid, more personal. The coordinator frowned slightly. Something was clearly different from what had been planned. A second later, she walked toward her laptop. Too late, the slideshow continued. Apparently, multiple family members had submitted photographs to a shared folder. The final presentation had accidentally included everything, not just the curated selection. A murmur moved through the room. There was my brother at 19 after losing his first job. There we were painting his apartment after he could barely afford rent. There was a photo of several family members helping him move during a difficult period, and there I was, repeatedly, not as the center of attention, simply present, helping, supporting, showing up. The room didn't react dramatically. Nobody gasped. Nobody whispered scandal, because there wasn't a scandal. There was context, a fuller version of the story. One photograph lingered longer than the others. My brother sat on the back of a pickup truck, exhausted and discouraged. I stood beside him holding 2 cups of coffee. I remembered that day instantly. He had been convinced everything was falling apart. Most people in the room had never heard that story. Now they could see it. The coordinator finally paused the slideshow. A brief technical apology followed. Guests laughed politely. The presentation resumed. But something subtle had shifted. Conversation started. Memories surfaced, relatives began sharing stories, friends asked questions, not about failure, about resilience, about family, about the people who had helped along the way. For the first time all day, my brother looked directly at me. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us looked away. It wasn't anger, it wasn't gratitude. It was recognition. The wedding continued, the dancing continued, the marriage began. Nothing collapsed, nothing exploded. Yet the distance he had carefully constructed suddenly felt harder to maintain, because once people had seen the complete album, the edited version became less convincing. Late that evening, as guests prepared to leave, I passed the screen one final time. A photograph remained frozen there, not a glamorous one, not an important one. Just 2 brothers carrying boxes up a staircase years earlier. Ordinary, forgettable, true. And sometimes truth changes a room more quietly than anyone expects.